All right, I guess this is supposed to be a fireside chat, so we're going to talk about design principles, but we wanted to also introduce ourselves a little bit to give you a sense of why we care about this. So I've been either designing experiences or leading design teams for most of my career. I started out designing desktop interfaces and websites, and then over time, when mobile devices took over the world, did a lot of design for mobile applications, and then eventually my work spilled out of the screen and into physical environments. And it was, experience design for physical buildings, spaces, physical digital experiences. And now I'm at Magic Leap leading product design and designing platforms and products for XR. So I care a lot about this because I've kind of through each of those shifts, those interface modality shifts, had a front row seat at trying to shed some old habits as a designer and discover and define new ones because these mediums are very different and new rules apply. And a lot of it is about tinkering and experimenting and learning and then starting to define new paradigms. So that's a lot of what we ended up doing at Magic Leap because we are at that point again with augmented reality. And what some of the things I'll share today are not from me alone. They're a culmination of the collective knowledge of folks at Magic Leap over years because we've been in this medium for a while.
Thanks, Pavani. I'm Alicia Berry. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the executive producer at Niantic supporting the Peridot team and IP. I started my career in industrial decals. So those are pieces of plastic that went over buttons to run industrial machinery. And this was in the 90s. What's so funny is all of these buttons were replaced by screens throughout my career. And I have followed that UI language from the 90s into my career in media technology starting in about 2024. So about 20 years experience launching and running technical media products, services, and in the last year or so, I've been working on the Peridot application, and then recently we launched an application on the Quest 3, Hello Dot, and it is the culmination of industrial design buttons. My background in gaming, I shipped the Elder Scrolls Online, which is a giant MMO around 2013, using mega shard technology from the server, massively hundreds of players online, beating the crap out of each other. And then into Meta, I worked on the Quest line and pretty much any social VR experience that you've experienced at Meta, I probably had a hand in it. Horizon, Oculus Venues, Oculus Rooms, and tons of asymmetrical gameplay with resolution games. So I've seen a ton of different technologies like Pavani, but most of mine have been in the entertainment and experiential media area. I'm really excited to share anything I have learned in this with all of you, because I think that we are at a brand new design paradigm. I don't think the things that worked 10 years ago, 5 years ago, are going to work in mixed reality. And what we've learned, at least on the Peridot team, I think can be applied right now.
Yeah, I got to try Peridot yesterday, or Hello Dot on the Quest yesterday. It was awesome. A lot of the principles that, again, coincidentally that, come to mind for me, I was experiencing in it, so I was really excited that, we'll get to talk about that. One of the first principles, actually, that I want to talk about is something that I felt yesterday when we were trying out the experience together. And I consider this to be one of the most important principles for AR specifically. And it doesn't sound profound, but staying present or keeping your users present in their real world, again, it sounds really simple, right? But it's something that executionally is really hard, and I see it done wrongly so much. And I think part of it is because perhaps some of us are coming to AR from VR, and we kind of club these technologies all together under this umbrella. But if you are doing that, you have to do a mindset shift because you're not trying to transport someone. We're not trying to surround them in something virtual. In AR, you're trying to augment or enhance their real world. And so making sure that people are situationally aware and present is really important. Magic Leap hardware, we are specialized in optical see-through technology, which means that the notion of presence and having real-world visibility is baked into the hardware. But you all as developers, what you do actually is going to make or break that. You kind of have to follow through on that hardware promise. And what that means is like you can't, just because you can render content across an entire room or across the entire FOV, for example, doesn't mean you should, right? Just because you can immerse people into a spatial audio symphony doesn't mean you should. Staying present or allowing people to stay present is about understanding that the real world takes priority over the virtual world. And you have to kind of resist the urge to do a bunch of things that you want to do. Sometimes this is about safety, honestly. I mean, because our brains and our bodies work really hard every moment to keep us safe as we're navigating the physical world. We don't realize it, but our eyes are shifting or adjusting as we move from a light room into a dark room. Our bodies are intuitively helping us maneuver around objects that are in our peripheral vision. And so as a developer, if you're going to be hacking that or tinkering with that, there's a lot of responsibility to make sure you're not messing with this very innate superpower that we as humans have. So it's a lot. It's a lot of responsibility. But I actually think that this principle is not just about safety. I think it's also about delight, and that's a little bit of what I'm sure, Alicia, you can chime in on, because I experienced yesterday with Hello Dot, the creature that I was playing with, the way it was like reacting to the physical environment and very cognizant of the realities of the boundaries of the space we were in. I thought that was very delightful.
Thanks for the kind words. I love the Magic Leap too. I just want to let you know, I don't think I've mentioned this, but I just think that delivers all the promise of Magic Leap, and I really like the rendering of the darks. I just wanted to share that. I love it. One thing that is the most important principle is whether or not it should even be on the headset.
Yep.
And I really feel like sometimes teams just put things on hardware because it's there. They want to get the big headlines, but really it's about, is this going to perfect your desire or your goal? Is it going to reflect what the player's expectation or the person expectation is in the scene? I find that a little bit goes a long way in mixed reality versus virtual reality, which you build the scene, you take them to a place. Yesterday in a panel, I saw Jesse Schell say mixed reality is about characters and things, and virtual reality is about places, and that really resonated with me. I think it is just adding tiny amounts of content in a way that really, for me, delights players, makes it magical. When we were building Peridot on the mobile app, one of the things that we needed to get right was walking with your Peridot. Yeah. So taking your phone and walking and it seeing the world with you and being by your side and feeling like a buddy. And that's so challenging in a headset that we can't take outside yet, or maybe we can with Magic Leap. But
people are taking it outside, actually doing some really cool things outside with it.
But when you take it to your house or your office, you can't have that necessary motion. So what is it for us? What is bonding with your Peridot? And it's about eye contact. It's about the animations that play. It's funny that Pavani says that the dot was so aware. It's really not. It's we map it so easily, and our brains think of it as alive with not a lot of engineering involved. It's amazing what our brains will do.
Yeah. No, I definitely felt like it was a buddy. And it was literally, I spent 2 minutes with it, right? Mm-hmm. So you mentioned eye contact, and that actually reminds me of another principle that is important when we're thinking about AR specifically, which is to embrace human abilities. I sometimes, in design circles, try to shy away from using the term human, just because human-centered design is kind of this tired phrase. It's been etched into every UX design textbook, and you hear people talking about it all the time. But I actually think it's really important to bring it up again and reclaim that phrase, because we finally have a medium that can really, truly claim to be human-centered. And it means that, those of us who've been artificially designing swipes and scrolls and taps because we had no choice with other interface modalities. Now we can replace those with much more truly natural human inputs. So what you look at, what you touch, what you say, like all of these are legitimate forms of interacting. And I know for me and for many of us, right, who have been in design industries or have been doing UX design for a while, it's uncomfortable to some degree because you have to shed some of these old habits, and also you have users who are not used to, even though these are very natural ways of interacting, they're not used to that because we've all conditioned them to, tap a button or interact in ways that are actually more of an abstraction, right? So it's going to take all of us to really lean in, to experiment, and start to come back to these very human, natural ways of interacting.
Absolutely. There are two stories from Hello Dot that I can share. And the first is I'm a big fan of touch controllers. I think it adds a lot to the experience. I love haptic feedback. I think it just tricks you in ways that you don't expect. So I was a big proponent of just any controller, and the team just left the controllers on the desk and are like, hand tracking. And I am a convert. Hand tracking is it can be so magical. And I think it's because you can suspend your disbelief because you're not actually holding something, but you're seeing it. And people talk about the energy they feel when they touch a Peridot. I attended Nicole Lazaro's talk, and she said something about when people opened up the book in the mist, they felt an electric feeling to it, and that is a sign of wonder. And I think that the hardware that we have on the market right now can bring us that wonder in amazing ways with not a lot of work. And the second is, it's so easy to fall into some of the design habits we have with mobile or even in VR, but MR is a very different thing. You're in your home or you're in your office and you're interacting with something. You don't need to have floating buttons. You don't need to use the same types of languages you have in the past. You have a different context. And so when we started to prototype, we had select your dot. Here's 3 dots, pick a dot, push a button. And the creative director, Dave Holland, and I were like, no, let's make something new. And so we made this paint bucket, and you just tossed your dot in the paint bucket, and it created a new one.
I loved that. It was so fun.
It's so
I just
small.
kept dunking it in there. Yeah.
It's so small, and there's so many buttons. There's so many button rules and things, and this is it's so fun to play around, and I encourage you to really say, do we need this button? Do we need to pick this thing? What could we do that's different?
You mentioned controller, hand tracking, and I think for the experience you created, hand tracking absolutely makes sense. With Magic Leap, we do have a controller, and I think one of the things when we think about this principle is that embracing human abilities is also about embracing, all human abilities and disabilities, and realizing that not all humans are made alike also. And so I think it's also about understanding that you have to pick and choose your input modalities depending on your audience and depending on the situation. So it's kind of like old school design thinking, right? Like just really understand your audience, understand the situation. So there is no, I don't think, one size fits all. I think you do have to pick good defaults, smart defaults, and then allow people to choose what works best for them. An example that comes to mind is, if you're a patient who has Parkinson's disease and you're going through physical therapy with a AR headset, which is actually a real use case for us, maybe the tactility and the haptical feedback of the controller is helpful. Maybe if you can't be, you have to be hands-free because you have to use your hands for your work, right? Like maybe voice or gaze input is more appropriate. So it's really not one size fits all, even though we should be choosing smart defaults. So I think that's one of those nuances, and this, leans into, of course, like accessibility, inclusivity, which there were some talks yesterday that, talked about this in a really expansive way, and we can't ignore the fact that, again, with this new paradigm, we have to set some of those new standards and think much more broadly.
When I was in Meta, I worked on an app called Facebook Spaces, and everybody was like, let's put the UI on the wrist. And then we will have people, it's just a watch, it's a paradigm people know, we can do all kinds of things with it. Man, was that a mistake. It was such a poor design decision because two-handed movement when you're not used to things is hard, one. a lot of people don't have 2 arms, 2, and 3, it's so limiting. Why would we limit to a small screen when we can use basically an infinite space? And I encourage people to, like, there are some bad practices. I've seen a lot of people bring a mobile phone into a scene because that's how they communicate with others. It's you know, you do this with a kid, they have no idea what you're talking about because
Yeah, my 4-year-old doesn't.
right? Like, maybe we should stop doing those two-dimensional things and find a different abstraction, or maybe not even an abstraction at all. Maybe something we can go direct, which is so different than the design languages we've had for the last, since the printing press. It's all been two-dimensional. We've all taken our wonderful brains and put it in 2 dimensions. We now have freedom, and we have freedom where people feel confident and happy in their homes. I think we can take some risks.
Yeah, taking some more risks, and again, doing it. I'm looking at some of our research team here who've been studying this, right, with users. It's interesting because those abstractions people have now internalized. So it's like, how much do you push to bring them back to what's natural to them? And I think it's going to happen in the next few years. Like, it's going to happen with the folks in this room. There's one thing I want to make sure we don't miss before we move on to the next principle when it comes to human or being human-centered, and that is being social, because we are social creatures and we connect naturally with other people in the physical environment. And I think that is another thing that optical see-through headsets like Magic Leap, you know, this principle comes baked in, right? The ability to socially connect with other people, because you can be very present, unlike many VR headsets that are somewhat isolating. And so, you know, if you and I are sitting here and we both have, let's say, Magic Leap 2 headsets on, and there's content that we're working on, it's my expectation that what I see is what you see, because that's kind of how things work in the real world. But if you as a developer are not thinking about how to make us aware of the fact of what is shared and what is private, because virtually we can obviously have very independent experiences as well. Like, what are those paradigms? What are those patterns that are going to make us aware of, again, what is shared and what is not, and in a way that's going to respect reality and respect our expectations? So again, this is a whole nother talk for another time, but those are the types of patterns and norms that, you know, we've just, you know, started to scratch the surface. And actually, on this topic, you should stay to listen to the talk after this, because there's some folks from Magic Leap who are going to talk about collaboration and shared experiences.
I have an example of where being creative has also gone sideways in the user experience. When we were building the mobile app, same thing, Blue Sky, and it's an AR-first mobile app, which is a big challenge. And so we were like, let's throw all of our assumptions out the window, and all of our UIs were like in bubbles, and some players had no idea what to do with it.
Yeah.
So you can't go too crazy, but there is a fine middle ground.
There's a balance, right? One more thing on human abilities. We are mobile creatures as well. We like to move around in all different ways. And that's another feature of AR and optical see-through AR, specifically because you are situationally aware and present in your real world. It's safe to move around. It's safe to navigate. And as a designer or as someone who's developing experiences for specifically these types of headsets, you now have to think about and account for the fact that people are moving around, and we want them to be moving around. So, you know, is your UI moving around with the person, or is it world locked? So those content behaviors are a very specific, intentional decision that you have to make as a designer, which is something you don't have to do with, you know, other interfaces. And, you know, it's even really simple things like, let's say there is a menu that is important to the experience, and you decide to tether it to the person because you don't want them to lose it, because you know they're going to be moving around. You know, should that menu move out of the way when they start walking? Should it shrink down? What are those, you know, micro norms that we want to bake into things that are, you know, menu design systems have been around on 2D interfaces forever, and there are norms already, but we don't really have those norms in this medium. And we've, at Magic Leap over the years, started to define our own versions of these. But collectively as a community, right, we need to discover and define those so that people aren't having to reinvent and, you know, redo all those studies all over again.
where the content is in the scene is so complicated. I think that's maybe where we should be spending a lot more time iterating and polishing versus just covering the core functionality.
Yeah, yeah. Which actually, like, where is content located? That leads me to our next one. Great segue. Spatializing with purpose. So I think that this one's really important because in light of keeping people present in their real world, in light of being human and creating human experiences, I often think that people do spatializing in the wrong way within this medium. We conflate, I think, the word spatial with three-dimensional things in front of you. And really, I think there's a lot more nuance to the word spatial or spatialize. Two-dimensional lines that are surrounding an object, that's spatial. Like if all you need to do is call attention to that object, maybe that's all you need, two-dimensional lines. Maybe you don't need visuals at all. Maybe all you need is a pinging sound over here to get you to turn your head and notice something over there, right? That's spatial. And so there's a lot more nuance to spatializing, and I think that those of us who are designers or creators, we have to resist the urge to throw everything at it, which is related to another thing that I like to say all the time, which is perfecting the nudge. Think about designing spatially as nudging people, and actually designers, like that's all you've been doing for decades, nudging. Even if you were designing a website, the size and shape of the button and where you place it, you're just designing it so that people notice it and click on it. You're nudging people to get there. You're not telling them to do it, you're like nudging them. And in AR or in spatial mediums, that's all you're doing, but you now have a whole new set of tools and a bunch of other ways that you can nudge people. So we have to learn how to perfect the nudge all over again. And again, resist the urge to throw everything at it because of some of those principles we just talked about, keeping people present and respecting the real world over the virtual world. So there's an art and a science to this that we all have to get better at.
I don't know if any of you attended the Tom Furness talk yesterday and the keynote. It was really compelling to me, and I really enjoyed his talk about converting a cockpit of dials and from an analog world to screens to a digital world to an immersive helmet to really give that pilot the data that they needed when they needed it. And I feel like the highlight of his talk was his last point, which is they weren't even sure if the pilot was awake. There's, with G-force, people pass out. And so there was a feedback loop from the person to the content to the system, and it's a system of feedback just so to keep this hyper complicated thing moving forward. And it really resonated with me that I think that the next magic of mixed reality is that feedback loop where perhaps we know where I know there's privacy concerns, but just pretend like that wasn't a thing. Seeing content and not seeing content and knowing when someone sees content and they don't see content and being able to really present that to them in a sequence that reacts to the way that they're interacting with it is a superpower. And with our 2D devices, we've seen a lot of optimization on this, but I think that there is a huge blue sky for interactive content and even tooling that says, hey, you didn't do this thing, or have you seen this thing in a very immersive and kind way to nudge, like a new nudge.
A new nudge, yeah. I mean, I really like what you're talking about. We talk, at Magically, we talk about looking inward and outward, so being able to sense what's happening with the user and also sense what's happening in the environment and responding accordingly. So I think that's what that reminds me of. And I mean, you mentioned privacy. I mean, that is a real thing too. And going back to the principle of human-centered, people, care about that. And so there are ways to handle privacy, I think, also in this new medium. It's something that as a platform provider, we've had to think about. So there's a lot of new norms, again, going back to the theme of this talk. And I don't think we all have answers. Those of us who've been designing in this medium for a while have tinkered and experimented and have a lot of, we definitely have a point of view, but there's a lot more to be done and to be put on paper and to be shared broadly so that we can all leverage the learnings collectively. think we're out of time. We could talk about this for forever.
we're
We're
getting
just
the nudge.
scratching the surface. Yeah.
We have a nudge.
But thank you. That was a very beautiful panel. And I really felt that importance of having human-centered design and redefining what that means. If people in the audience have questions, would you be able to answer them for a couple minutes
Sure.
outside, perhaps?
Yeah, outside. You can find us outside. You can find us on LinkedIn. So
Perfect.
thanks for having us.
Yeah, so continue to take advantage of these speakers.